Hi, folks. Emily Patillo and Sarah Franson here from RevZen to deliver you another one of our mini pods. I think a lot of the cool conversations that Sarah and I end up having are just conversations that we have kind of on the fly. And so something came up and we thought, hey, that might be something cool to talk about. So, uh, Sarah, you wanna start with what you're kind of seeing this week?
Yeah, so I was talking with one of my clients this week and um they raised a concern. They were like, our operations team is just having a harder time with these back-to-back turns that they have. They were wondering, does it make sense to increase our length of stay? Because right now our length of stay is only 3. We're doing well from an occupancy standpoint, from a revenue standpoint, year over year against the market. Would it make sense to increase that length of stay? And so we had a conversation about that. And I thought it was just really interesting because I think oftentimes we're faced with operational constraints or
Right.
difficulties, and we then turn to revenue in terms of like the levers that we have, and can we do something about that to make it better? So our conversation was really about, well, one, is it a need or is it just something that would just make things a little bit easier? There's that we have to like fairly assess. And then
Right,
it
like,
was
did it
like,
come
okay, so
from, like, operations that's saying this, and did it go through a pipeline to get to you?
right,
Like, who's involved
right.
in the process?
Right. Is it just this conversation at the water cooler kind of thing where we're like, hey, yeah, this is really hard for me and we can't do this anymore? Or is this like top down where
Right,
somebody's saying, we need to figure this out? And then beyond that, what are the trade offs that we're going to be, faced with if we decide to increase the length of stay? What's the potential fallout if that's not a good thing? Or what's the potential upside? And do we think that that's achievable? So that was just something that we were talking through this week, and I had brought this up in a conversation we were having, and so we were like, "Hey, we should talk about this on the mini pod because I think it's something that people face quite a bit."
right, like, just kinda go through our thought process with some of these conversations that we have with clients and the way that we think about handling it, so I guess one of my first questions would be, okay, like, when do you want to raise the length of stay? Like, how much leverage do we have? When you say that the property is doing well, like, is it overbooked and we're just trying to fill in gaps? Or is it something that you expect the same momentum, but you have less time to book it? Things like that. And then what's the market doing? How big is the home? Is it an individual home or is it all of the homes? Is it a
Yeah.
group of homes? Like how much is this actually affecting?
Yeah, and I think that it kinda gets back to that whole trade-off conversation, right? Because we can answer all those questions, and then there's the other variable of the homeowner, right? Because the home is performing to market, if not a little bit better from an occupancy standpoint. Same from a revenue standpoint, year over year. The owner's happy with the revenue. So, then I think when we start talking about trade offs, what are the things that could happen? One, well, if we increase the minimum length of stay, well, it's probably going to affect our visibility, right? Because people who are looking for 3-night lengths of stay are no longer going to see us if we increase it to 4.
Right.
You know, is that going to turn off the conversion? Is that going to slow the velocity? Is that going to, make the owner be like, what's wrong? Even if they're making more revenue than they did last year. And then not to mention to your point about, what's the market doing, right? What we did see was that the trend in the market from a length of stay perspective is declining. Year over year it was down, seasonally it's down within a shorter term as well. So are we at risk of affecting conversion there? Now the market's length of stay was longer than 3. So there's potential upside there too. Well, maybe we were just, a little bit too loose and we can tighten that up a little bit.
Like at this time, at this stage in the game, like if we're talking about this season, and granted, I don't even know which market this is, but
And it
is
doesn't
it
matter.
well, are we in the thick of, the booking window or,
Sure.
for this particular market? If it's leisure market, you probably are.
Yeah.
So considering the time that it is right now.
And no,
So
it's to answer your question, like doesn't matter what market it is, but they're in the shoulder going into the off season now.
yeah.
So we're already going into a lower, slower demand time. And then we're talking about potentially increasing the length of stay. Now, with the length of stays, particularly in the short window, right? It's not just answering the question, what's my length of stay? What's my minimum stay? It's, well, what type of guest am I trying to attract? Like right now,
Yeah.
especially like
Yes.
in that window or in your booking window, what am I trying to do? So
Yeah.
if you're going into a slower season, and, maybe you are underneath the market when it comes to what the average length of stay is for that market, for that segment. Maybe it's reasonable to say, okay, well, I can push it a little bit, but maybe it's not because you're going into a slow season and you're doing well, you're performing with the market. Like, is it worth turning off the spigot to what? Like, reduce the back-to-back turns. Yeah, maybe we shouldn't have back-to-back turns at this time of
And
year.
and that's another thing because is it the length of stay or is it the back to back? Would it be helpful to every once in a while during a super low demand time block off a date so you can't do a back to back? Or do they have early check-ins, late checkouts that they are being a little lax on? Or kind of what's the story there?
Yeah. And those are super important questions to be asking because it's not just a length of stay question, I guess is the main
Right.
one, right? Like we can start talking about should we raise or lower? Should we, what should we do? But when what you're impacting is not just a length of stay. Are we right or are we wrong? Should it be 3 or should it be 4? All of those other underlying things are really important.
For sure. And there's also the consideration that their fee structure with the turns, are they a profit center or are they more of a loss? So if we have less turns, like how is that going to affect not just the rental revenue, but the total revenue for those reservations? And has this conversation been had with the CEO of the company or whoever else is making those decisions?
Yeah, and I think that's where we got to, right? Which is this is not a revenue management question. Like, yes, revenue management controls the lever, in question, but the impact of this is business wide. So it's not completely up to the revenue manager to make that decision. Now, I would say it would be if, say, like the stay is impacting revenue in a negative way. Like, and you're like, okay, well, if we loosen this up, we can help
Right.
drive and optimize revenue for this home, all that, that's within, the confines of what we do. But once we start talking about using our levers to impact other areas of the business, I think it becomes a wider conversation. And it's not just this client, right? I've had this experience with multiple clients and in my previous world, right? It's like we want to be able to control what we can control, but when you're controlling areas that impact outside of your kind of immediate zone, there are other conversations that need to be had.
I think we've both worked in at least cross-functional departments, touched a lot of different ones, and so we're always thinking about how does this affect another department? How does this affect the whole? And am I doing something in a silo that's good for me, but not necessarily good for others? And so you can't really blame folks for bringing and surfacing these things. However, they might not always understand the downstream effects. So that's one of the questions I always ask. Like, what are the downstream effects? How does this impact other folks? How does this impact your total revenue? You need to think of the whole and not just what's in front of your face right now. So, can we find solutions for the short term pain so we can help the long term goal?
Yeah, we talk a lot about silos in our space and for good reason, right? We don't want to be so siloed that we're losing the forest for the trees kind of thing.
Right.
At the same time, it's important to let the people who are working whatever aspect that is of the business to allow them to be the experts in that role. Let operations lean into what they're really good at from the operations side, revenue from the revenue side, marketing, but to also understand that like you can still have a bunch of experts, but there has to be that connective tissue that's
Right.
that's ensuring that everybody is looking out for each other, right? That's the true team thing. But I do think that sometimes this gets lost because we're like, oh, we have this opportunity to flip a lever. We can change length of stay. And then
Right.
everybody's like, yeah, 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 change length of stay. Yeah, let's do that. And you're like, well, wait a minute, wait, hold on. You're like, that is my lane, right? But
Yeah.
I've got a lane in a big pool. Like
Yeah.
it impacts other people. Like I can't just do one thing and expect it just to have like a really minimal or targeted impact. Sometimes we can do that. Other times, it's really important that we kind of take that step back.
Mm.
It's just become that much clearer to me that revenue management, great lane, great silo, great discipline, whatever you want to call it, but it is so integrated and so impactful for
Oh, for
so many
sure.
different areas. And if we're not keeping that in mind, we are potentially flipping levers to the detriment of the wider business goal rather than, helping to improve it. That is clearly not what we want to do. We want to make sure that we've got everybody aligned, everybody on board, everybody understands. So, that was kind of the big aha moment for me this week was like, this happens a lot. And there's probably a lot of times where, we don't see it happening. This was one of those moments where I did see it happening. Um, it allowed me to have that conversation with the client too. Like,
Like, at least they brought you into that
yeah,
conversation instead of just making it "This is what we need to do because of whatever reason," right?
yeah,
You were brought into the conversation so you can expose what might happen.
yeah, yeah. And not that, I mean, once you kind of get the conversation started, everybody is like, oh yeah, we should focus here. We should look at these things. And it gets people talking. But I think it's one of those things that it matters. It matters to talk about it. It could be like the stay, it could be anything, but those things have the ripple effect.
Right. I can't tell you how many times that I'm interacting or I'm engaged with a client that maybe we have a limited scope. Maybe we're just doing pricing and pricing management for them. But then they have a distribution question, or they're just kind of talking about it, or they're looking to add something else to their portfolio. And I'm like, sorry, guys, I know this is out of scope, but I have to speak up because this is my experience in this. And if you do this, then this could happen. And that is like I said, that is one of the benefits of working with RevZen because we do have that experience that we can bring to the table, even if our scope is limited, because we've been there, right? We've seen we've been maybe operationally on the other end of it, and we've seen firsthand how that happens or how the revenue impacts so many different verticals within the company. And so having an understanding of, okay, high level, this is where it sits. And yeah, we're not just talking about nightly rates and ADR and occupancy, we're actually thinking about the entire health of your company. And so, are we treating a symptom or are we actually fixing a root cause? Like, what is the issue here? So,
Yeah. And I
that's
mean,
part of it.
it could be that increasing length of stay is a great option, right?
Right.
It could be that it's a good remedy for the situation. But until we understand the entire problem, and to your point, the root of that problem, we're not going to fix whatever we see on the surface by just flipping a lever that we know is kind of tied to that, right?
Right, exactly. So in this case, it could go either way. I think you just need more information, right? It's because at the end of the day, if you decide that you're going to flip that lever, maybe it's the best decision that you could have made at the expense of revenue, short term revenue, because you would have lost so much more long term if your cleaners quit or you get so many bad reviews as a result. And maybe that is the right call, even though from a revenue operations standpoint, it all of the metrics point to this doesn't make sense, right? Like,
Yeah.
let's look at it from a holistic standpoint.
Yeah, and I think the great news is that where we ended the conversation. So my role with this company is more of a, kind of a high level strategic. I'm not in there flipping the levers. This is the person that came to me was the person who flips the levers. And so the great thing to come out of this was that there wasn't a solution, right? It wasn't like, okay, I'm going to do this. It was, we're going to bring everybody to the table and we're going to talk about this and we're going to talk about the potential impacts of something as small as,
Right.
a length of stay for a home. And hopefully this is just kind of where we start, right? We're going to practice having these kinds of conversations. It's going to be part of the fabric of the business. And this is how the business is going to move forward and grow.
Right, right. And it's not just a good practice for revenue, it's a good practice for anything. So, like, you have to think about the downward effects that will happen when you make these types of decisions, and to your point, a lot of times it is just, "Hey, I know it's inconvenient, but we've gotta get all of the appropriate people in the room so we all understand what's going on. Does this affect you? No. Does this affect you? No. Does this affect you? Yes, potentially. All right, let's talk about it. And then we'll come to a decision, move on. And so we make that a practice in how we do business moving forward. And so we're not completely siloed. We're understanding all of our risks. And everybody's kind of signed off on it. Everybody that needs to be signed off on it, they understand. Because the last thing you want to do is blindside somebody because you
Yeah.
thought it was a good idea and it sounds like a good idea in a vacuum, but not in the entire ecosystem.
The more I think about it, the more I'm like, the silo thing, I don't really get. But like the swimming pool and the lane, like stay in your lane kind of thing, like that does kind of make sense because I can't tell you how many times where I'm like, from a revenue perspective, I want to be like, stay in your lane. This is my lane. But my lane is in this giant Olympic sized pool of all the
Yeah,
other
you've got
lanes,
the whole
right?
pool. They're like, "Stop
Yeah,
hogging all the lanes."
it's a pool, like, right? Let me swim in my lane. But yeah, you're working with everybody in that whole pool. So yeah, I think that's something that I think we see all the time, right? In our roles, we're pretty. I think we're pretty lucky to be able to work the way we do with so many, clients that frankly are pretty amazing.
Oh,
Um,
for sure.
but you get to see so many cool aspects of the business and work with different personalities and different leadership styles and put that Tetris thing together or the puzzle together and make it work. But this is the kind of thing that comes up a lot. And we're going to handle it differently with different clients because it's a different business. But anyway, I just think that that's pretty cool, and I love being able to chat with you, which is kind of what we're doing with these mini pods is, chat with you about the things that we're seeing and finding
Right.
the similarities and figuring out like, "Hey, this is what I'm seeing. Are you seeing this too? What kinds of, strategies and tactics are you employing?" Like, I just think that that's really cool. And I also think it's pretty amazing that our industry is evolving the way that it is, that where we want to have these conversations, we want to open these conversations to people to, allow everybody to get better.
Yeah. Well, I think that we have talked our way through this mini pod enough to potentially be a full pod. So thanks for joining, guys. We will see you on the next episode.
Thanks, everybody.